Welcome to Conlangery, the podcast about constructed languages and the people who create them. I'm George Corley, and with me over in Germany, we have CD Covington.
Hi.
Yeah. So I had you on. You have a column for Tor that covers science fiction and fantasy stuff for from a linguistic perspective. And you've got a YouTube channel that covers the science fiction, fantasy, linguistics. But the most sort of important thing that we were gonna the most like pressing thing that we were gonna cover is you are writing a book about world building, linguistic world building for science fiction and fantasy properties. So, maybe we can start out with what is your background in linguistics and how did you get interested in this topic? It's sort of related to conlanging. I'm sure you encounter conlangs as you are talking about all this stuff, but also like a broader world building thing. So like, how did you get interested in this and involved in this? And, give us a little bit of a background there.
Yeah. I got my master's in linguistics from the University of Georgia in 2019. I wrote about German verbs. But I've been reading science fiction since I was 12 or something. And I've been writing since forever. And I started writing science fiction about 25 years ago, maybe more seriously than I had been when I was, a kid. And I love reading, obviously. And I was just finishing up my master's when I had the idea that I could write about linguistics in science fiction, because I was reading a lot of, Arrival had come out fairly recently, and The Expanse was just airing for the first time on TV, and you could see like the Belta slang, Belta Creole. And I was like, well, maybe I could do something interesting with this. And I was like, I wrote a little pitch and they were like, yeah, sounds great. So I wrote about Arrival because it was kind of part of my pitch, and I wrote about The Expanse. I wrote about Babel 17 from Chip Delaney from the 70s. It's like the computer, like it's a computer language that is taking over people's brains and turning them into like, I don't know, computer. It was a Chip Delaney book, basically. It's very strange.
Okay.
It was very well written, but just also very, the brain is a computer and can be literally programmed by this programming language that is this alien language. It's kind of like, well, it's fiction. Right? Yeah. It's kind of like, well, it's fiction. Is how I answer a lot of things. Well, it's fiction. But one of my favorite book series is C.J. Cherryh's Foreigner series. Mm-hmm. And she's not super conlanger, but she does invent at least surface level languages for her books. Do you feel familiar with her?
I have read one of her works. I think mostly what she focuses on is like these interpreters, right?
Yeah, in the Foreigner series,
that are between the aliens and the humans and have to like navigate the culture and the language. But it's sort of everything's represented as English except for some isolated words, I think.
Yeah. And she refers frequently to the structure of their language and how their verb forms require various lots of math, because you have to calculate the number of people that are involved in the situation, and that also includes the numerology of the room around you and all this other complicated math just to conjugate your verbs and get your pronouns right. And that's pretty cool, but probably not work in any sort of reality-based anything. But it's really cool because they're aliens, and they're very different than humans. They have different psychology, different biology. And that's one of the things that I'm going to get into a lot in my book, how you can do intercultural communication is a big issue at most of her books, really. but in Foreigner especially, the whole way that people, the humans and the Atevi, can't, they don't understand the word friend. Atevi don't have the concept of love or friend or like. They don't have the concept of liking or loving or friendship or anything like that. They have Manchi, which is sort of like a herding instinct that humans don't understand. So when they first met, the humans and the Atevi were like, oh, this is great. They're just a little bit weird, but they're like us, so it'll be fine. And the humans basically assumed that the Atevi would all be their friends. And the Atevi were kind of like, we assume they're going to learn manners someday. The humans never learned manners. There was like a war, and it was great. The humans lost, and they're like, the Atevi said, you can stay on this island, stay over there, and while you're staying on your little island over here, you're going to give us the technology that you brought with you because you're from outer space. And we're not going to be living they're in the steam age at the time. They had like steam locomotives. And part of the treaty was that the humans would share the technology, but it had to be translated into the Atevi's language using their math, which is a little bit different than human math because there's a lot more of it. They do all the complicated math in their head. I'm like,
okay.
yeah. So
Well,
that's part of how I got into the whole writing about linguistics and science fiction, because you really can. There's so much in there where people who think about it do it, and I want to get more people to think about it.
yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thing when you're talking about alien psychology is it can be very much a wide open slate because you can predict. I said this on an earlier podcast, like you can sort of predict some things about phonology by knowing like what organs they have and what kinds of either sounds or gestures they could produce, right? But the psychological aspect, we probably don't know enough about human brain structure influencing language to actually extrapolate out and figure out how alien brain structure would influence language, right? I mean, we can probably have some foundational things about what language does and how it would have to work in order to function as a language, but otherwise it's pretty open. I did read a few of your articles for your I did read some of your column. I have to take issue with your take on Arrival, or not Arrival, on Embassy Town from your video. But no, I mean, it's just a matter of taste. Like, I think we agree that the language of the host is functionally impossible. It could not happen. I was able to accept that because I felt like the book was self-aware about that, especially with the linguist character like pointing out like this doesn't make any sense and then becoming obsessed with it. But for you, it just wasn't working. Which is I think another thing. Yeah. It's another thing to think about is, you know, like on this show, most of the time when I'm talking about things and the way I'm thinking about things, it's in terms of making a language naturalistic and making the world building naturalistic. But what you were talking about with the Atevi, I think you have some idea of balancing like the naturalism with the art of it, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm just going to keep going back to CJ Cherry because she's really good at making aliens that aren't just like people that are painted blue or have pointy ears or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, like I love the Vulcans, but they're just like people with pointy ears and no feelings. Yeah. The one thing she does that I wish I could do in my own writing a lot better than I do is just develop these societies and the way they work. and then they're just so different from the way people work. And she makes it believable that they make sense, if that makes sense. I don't even know if I'm asking you a question right now, but the so like the art part is figuring out how to make something realistic and believable that's not human, if that's what you're going for. If you're just going for making two different human societies on a secondary world planet or whatever, that's fine and different. But you can still kind of do this sort of thing because they won't have the might not have the psychological differences, but whatever. Like the trick is getting your world building down, right? So that's what I'm writing my book about, to get your character, your other culture to seem plausible. And we know how to do that. Writers already do that in things like history and geography. Maybe some do geology. I don't know. Your maps of your space stations. Like we think about that. Sometimes people even throw in music and whatever. But what people don't really think about, as much as I think would be cool, is how people use language, because that's something we do in day-to-day life. Like I'm a linguist. I do think about it all the time. But your average person probably doesn't sit around thinking about, oh, why is that sound like that? And how does this dialect work? How is that one compared to that dialect? Because that's like what I do all day. Not all day, but
right.
So your characters will be aware of this. Like you, general people watching this podcast or listening to it are aware that people who sound like me are probably white, probably from the East Coast of the United States, kind of thing, and probably developing, I don't want to say prejudices, but sort of just a sort of like a picture in your head of me. But if I talk kind of like the way I lived in Georgia for 4 years and I lived in North Carolina for like 20 before that. So I did pick up a bit of Southern in my laugh, and you get a different picture if somebody talks like that, right? It's a different person. And so we're aware of this. And if your characters are also aware of this, you're adding that extra layer of something cool. That's kind of the art that I'm trying to get to, I think. People kind of add that extra layer of very similitude. I've never been able to figure out how to pronounce that word. But does that make sense?
Yeah, no, you're totally making sense. And I totally agree. And I see, you've pointed out places where authors have done very well with their linguistic world building, but very often it is like a side note, just like something that is mentioned in a character description once and kind of left, or it is, mentioned on the side. Sometimes there's very, there's, ways of describing language that I wish would go away. I have said before, when an author says a language is guttural, I do not know what that actually means.
Probably they're like, like they mean it sounds like German, probably, but like, it's just, guttural kind of has a meaning in linguistics, but not really. And then the languages, the real world languages that I have heard described as guttural are like, really? Like I've heard Cantonese described as guttural, and I'm like, really? I'm not sure about that. But there's so much like untapped potential in a lot of works for that. And we're here, my podcast is geared towards conlangers. And there's a lot of linguistic world building that can go behind the conlangs, but you don't necessarily have to have a full conlang, right? Yeah.
Let's back up. So your plan for your book. So what kinds of topics are you going to cover? And like, is there going to be mention of conlanging specifically, or is it going to be mostly just all of this like background sociolinguistic stuff?
Yeah. So I will probably touch briefly on conlanging. I am not a conlanging expert, and there's definitely much better guides out there already in existence, and like they're all behind you on the shelf there, I think. Um,
Yeah. There's
yeah,
this one. Yeah.
yeah. I think I'll probably haven't really planned that part out yet, but probably talk about a few that are like probably mention Tolkien and like Klingon and a couple of things of that, and say, hi, people have done this. You don't have to. If you really want to, go read this book, go read that book, go to this website and find the resources there. Here's a community. Have fun. But yeah, what I'm gonna focus on, the part I have not quite completely finished yet is I haven't done the morphology section yet because I'm like, is phonetics, morphology, and like morphology is really cool, but they didn't offer morphology class at Georgia when I was there. So the only class I had was in morphology was phonology and morphology of German.
Oh.
So it's very, very specific. I have a very, very, very limited knowledge of morphology. So I mean, I need to find a nice textbook to bother, or just be like, here's how it works in English and German. Not really useful or broadly applicable. Right. But so the verdict, I've written the most of the phonetic section, and so it's basically half of my semester of phonetics and phonology. So the phonetics half in 10,000 words. It's super crash course, no prot, none of that. But
and so,
yeah.
Are you talking just like introducing people to phonetics, like actual phonetics of human language? Are you also talking about like speculative phonetics of alien languages?
Yeah. I have a section that I'm probably going to expand all of this in the future as well, once I have a full draft together. I want to talk about how like phonetics, the vocal tract is affected by the phonetics is affected by the shape of the vocal tract, right? Because the mouth, the vocal tract is a tube, and it's a differently shaped tube. It's a weird tube, and the length of the tube determines what sounds you can make, blah, blah, blah. And the human mouth, the human, what's this called? Palate is 2.5, 3 inches long. What if you have like a wolf man and you've got like a 4 or 5 inch palate? How many more sounds can you make? How many more stops can you do? How many more different tongue positions can you get? What if you've got like jowly dog things? Actually, do you talk about Scooby-Doo in the draft I have right now? Because original Scooby-Doo is actually probably not that far off from how a dog would talk if it could speak.
Oh, really?
That's what I'm thinking. Because, I mean, we don't know. Great Danes can't speak. But they're jowly dogs, so you might notice. I'm going to talk about the 70s Scooby. I'm told the more modern Scooby sounds like an actual person talking, which is kind of not great. But so early Scooby, the one I grew up with, so it's like ruh-roh raggy, and he doesn't really round his lips very much.
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, it's because the Great Danes can't. They've got like a jowly, so they can't do this. They just kind of jowly, and like using an R for that or a rhotic for that, any sort of sound that the dog can't pronounce. Why not? R is kind of just this default. We don't know. It's a rhotic because we don't know what R's are. It's just everything that's else. It's not a stop. It's not anything else. It's just an R sound. So raggy kind of makes sense.
Yeah. If you do one thing when talking about like an alien language, or a language for something that's not human, how do you feel about the balance of like making it to like what that would actually sound like, what the actual creature would be able to do, versus making things that won't lose a reader. And I understand that, you know, different writers might have different thresholds on that, but like making it, you know, do you think you should be concerned about whether it's going to be pronounceable or comprehensible to the human reader, or like focus more on like the accuracy of the physiology you're constructing?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do with it, and like your personal goals, I guess, with how you're writing it. And also if you ever want to get an ebook made, or not an ebook, audiobook. Because if you're an audiobook narrator, you want them to be able to pronounce the letters, right? You don't want them to be like, well, this is, we can't do this sound, or just like if they have, it's like, there's a lot of like aliens that have extra speech organs or whatever. And like it's some sort of resonance chamber, and you're like, well, we can't do resonance chamber with this human speaker here. So,
have to do some audio engineering on that.
Yeah, we'll play with audio and or just get like a kazoo or something. I don't know. Actually, that would be hilarious. Every time they have to do the thing that honk a kazoo, it's difficult, and I haven't figured out how I want to explain that yet. That's in the future part of the book that I haven't written yet. Yeah, the like you want to be able to spell it for people. And that's part of that is deciding how you want to spell it, and that's an author's decision. Yeah. And then you get into like, do we want it to be pronounceable? And I admit there's a bunch of books that I've read, and the character names are just sort of look like a really bad Scrabble draw. Sometimes they do. So like, this is just a really bad Scrabble draw, and I just kind of look at them and I go like, that's that name. And I just kind of remember it as that's that name for the rest of the book. And I'm like, I'm not going to pronounce it. It's just S and a bunch of letters or whatever. That works for me as a reader sometimes, but maybe there's other readers who that wouldn't work for. They're like, no, I've been able to pronounce it. And yeah, it is hard finding that balance. And sometimes it's just kind of, well, I guess that's not my target audience if they're just going to skip it because they don't know how to pronounce a word. You're like, probably not my target audience. But if it is your target audience, why can't I pronounce that? They'll stick with you probably, right? Maybe if you're the kind of person who's writing that sort of book where you actually are thinking about a lot of these things, or game situation or whatever, maybe you're making it be more about language, and maybe your audience is going to want to read that because they're interested in reading about language.
Yeah. And it does depend on what the audience is. And your thing about names, like, you do have to have character names, right? And usually it's reasonable to say that your character names, if possible, are going to be from the language. There might be cases where they are just impossible to render in Roman script, like they're from a sign language, or the sounds are too radically different, and maybe you do translated names or something. But usually you want to have character names from the language. You said that you're not really going to do a whole lot of mention of conlanging, but like one thing that could be useful, I don't know if you are going to mention it, is the concept of a naming language, where it's just a limited conlang with just some phonology and morphology, just so you can make names, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I didn't know it was called that, so.
Yeah, well, it's nice to have some exchange of ideas.
Yeah, I love learning things. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. But, you know, that's something to make names within a culture consistent. Uh, what about issues of like prestige dialects? And you mentioned about having this world building set out can help with understanding about characters. Well, here's the question: is that so? You have prestige in sociolinguistics. We have um, stereotypes about different dialects. Like, one thing I would ask is, what are your thoughts on how to convey character perceptions of that without necessarily endorsing the idea that that's like a real thing, like, or that's like a valid thing?
Yeah, because prestige. One of my professors in grad school had a personal vendetta against the word prestige. Anytime somebody mentioned prestige language, you're like, there's no such thing as prestige. It's like, well, true, but because the way I like to think of it is a prestige language, like prestige has nothing to do with the language itself. It's how society, it's something society
Right.
gives to the language.
Right.
And it's a real concept and it's a real world thing and it's not a good thing, but it's a thing that exists and we have to deal with it just like everything. Everything. It's a thing. We live in society. We don't have to take it, but we have to deal with what we live with in the society we live in. And yeah, in the novel I'm revising, well, I will be revising after I finish all of this, because this is going to be my first priority of my Kickstarter funds. Is the two main characters are working class people. They work in a Waffle House, but it's in space, and they want to save their favorite bar from being gentrified, so they crowdfund to get the license for it. And the way they talk is normal, I guess. I mean, it sounds normal to me. But then there's another person who they interact with who's a manager, and the way she speaks is just different. Like she speaks at a more academic level, which is how I talk if I'm writing. That's my writing voice. She speaks in my writing voice, which is kind of funny. But so, like, that's kind of one way to do it. You can kind of, I don't have anybody comment on it. I don't think I have any comment on it, but somebody could. But like that, you can do that kind of thing, give characters different voices, different registers of formality, and maybe somebody can comment on it, like, wow, she talks fancy. And I don't know how to talk fancy like her. I'm glad she's dealing with all the fancy stuff, because if we went up to them and started talking like us, they would ignore us because we sound uneducated, because we're just baristas and waitresses. And so there are ways of doing that. And if you're writing a book about language, which I also really endorse, I think it's a great thing to do, because I want to read them. I want to read books about language. Is have people actually explicitly comment on it. Just kind of be like, if it's somebody who has to register shift or style shift in different locations, they can comment on, man, I hate putting on this voice. I hate putting on the businessman voice. I hate putting on the whatever voice kind of thing. Because there's ways to do it.
Yeah.
Subtly and less subtly.
Right. That's a good point. Is have a character explicitly do that, because there are people who have to think that way. It's not necessarily always automatic. And it is interesting to think about, like, how would the characters be perceiving it? It has to be, from their perspective, but also, maybe a variety of perspectives on what it is. Maybe some people buy into the prestige and other people like reject it, or they are uncomfortable about it, or recognize that it's arbitrary in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and if you do, write about linguistics in the story, that's definitely something that I would like to see more of too. Um, yeah. What else can we? So this book is going to be on a Kickstarter. When is that Kickstarter kicking off?
August 15th.
August 15th.
And it's going to run, it's going to run for a month. So until September 14th or 15th, whichever 30 days ends up being. I'm not sure exactly how Kickstarter counts that.
Well, so I will definitely get this up before, in time for people to contribute. What is your first goal for this Kickstarter?
1,500.
1,500. Yeah. So that's doable, guys. We can. I don't know if my audience by themselves can do this, but we can try, because these publishing Kickstarters tend to be pretty low, because you're just doing enough for what, like a print run or what?
It's going to be, there's ebook rewards and print and hardback.
Yeah.
And I've got some really cool limited edition rewards that I'm not going to spoil until it's launched. But I've also got, if you're not interested in the book tiers, I've got a €3 level. Everything's in euros because I'm in Germany. That's going to be a collection of my Torah essays that's edited. And the higher we back, the more we get funding we get, the more essays there will be. It'll be edited, have a nice little book cover, all that kind of thing. And it's only it's what, $4 right now, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly exchange rate.
That's great. And and it will be a writer's guide to linguistic world building. It sounds like something that a lot of my audience would be interested for, doing the background world building work behind the conlangs, and also for a lot of writers out there who are interested in how language interacts with the world and want to include that in their writing, which I presume is your primary audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's.
Oh, yeah. I hoping to write a book that's interesting to more people than just writers, books, and games, and that sort of thing. Because I'm hoping to make this kind of I want to learn more about linguistics. Where can I start? And also, these are some really great books. What books does Connie like that did it well? What books can she recommend?
Right.
Because I'm
Cherry.
CJ Cherry, A+.
And
Arcady Martine, also A+. Ursula Le Guin, but she's just amazing anyway. I don't think she did Linguistic Worldbuilding. I just think she's an A+ writer. But some of my favorite books that just are that do it really well, I think. And I've written about many of them for my Tor column, actually. But different examples and more detail.
Yeah, a different context.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What about the integration? Okay, I need to think. When you're integrating this into the narrative, I know that there's going to be all kinds of different ways that it goes into the narrative. How much do you like things where the language is a part of the world building and it affects things, but it's like a secondary plot versus things like Arrival, where language is the main thing.
Mm. Yeah, I like both.
Yeah.
One of the actually, I'm just gonna grab this book off my shelf. It's out of print. I got it used. It's a Hellburner. Actually, I think it's back in print in ebook only. I don't have my glasses on. I know that in this book, one of the things she did was they had a very big. Oh no, it was Heavy Time. There's some books that she wrote in the 80s, which I had my glasses on. But they're very slangy. 1992, and a lot of the slangy is just very. It sounds like somebody from the 80s, super dated, but that's part of the world building because the people who speak it are living on ships, and they've got their own little thing going on. So they have their own little language, and it sounds kind of 80s, but it's also, oh God, on this page, I'm like looking at it, it says, the new readout says CAF, MKT, and MS FUNC. Priority MS was blinking. I'm like, oh Christ. He keyed MS in the hash mark, and it's just keyed, right? He keyed the button, like he keyed the button. And like keyed isn't a word I would use for that, but it's the one they use in this book. And I guess this isn't really about linguistics at all.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of it's company wars, I think. Yeah. I haven't read this book in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can kind of do that. Not was it easily, but like you can make it part of the world building without being about it. If that makes sense.
And so when you're thinking about like representing these different dialect differences, how do you feel about it's not uncommon for authors to like take a real world English dialect and use that to represent a dialect of whatever world they're doing? How do you feel like about things like that, like these places where you're like using the stereotypes and associations in the real world to reflect the other world?
I have complicated feelings on that. Like when I read that, I'm just kind of sometimes, depending on the context, I guess I get irritated by it. It's like dialect is just one of those things that's just sort of out of fashion for a good reason right now. Yeah, it's not great. But though on the topic of dialect, when you have people who are from that dialect writing in their own dialect and spelling it writing in their dialect, that's a different matter than being like writing Henry Higgins or whatever, because that's what I'm talking about, right? Like Henry Higgins. Oh, Henry Higgins, just you white. The Rhine and spine falls mindly on the pline. You write it like that.
I mean, there that's a story that was about that particular dialect.
Yes,
but like
that was
the thing with
that example.
iDialect. And if people aren't familiar with the term, iDialect is where you respell words in order to reflect pronunciation in another dialect. Although, I mean, that's the basic point. Although sometimes I question whether the respellings are actually necessary for that, because sometimes they like. I've seen your spelled as Yore, and I'm like, what exactly is the different pronunciation that they're trying to represent? But
of your.
Yeah. But basically, this was very common in like 19th century and early 20th century literature.
It's all over the place in Dickens.
Yeah. It still happens in a lot of places, but to me, it's like an unnecessary barrier to your reader because like I see it and I don't know how to pronounce this stuff. And also like it often gets into like stereotyped and stuff. It's really interesting to see historical examples because I have seen like where you have like what and it's spelled W apostrophe AT. So that was telling somebody that it was
It's not what.
yeah, it's telling somebody that the default expected by the author was the what. Whereas, like, nowadays people might do the opposite and do like HW for someone who actually says what instead of what. But, you know, it's interesting in a historical perspective if you like research it, but like maybe try not to do that, especially if your dialects you're doing are not actually English.
Yeah, or your own. Because there's been, there were two or three stories in the Nebula nominees this year. The Nebula Award Science Fiction Writers of America. Does the Nebula Awards every year, in case no one knows. And at least two of them were written by Black writers that were written in their particular variety of English. And it was great because they were it's when it's written by a Black writer, it's underrepresented. When it's written by a white writer who's kind of being a stereotyping, not super great. So there is fine grained distinct like it's like what's the word? It's not black and white. I don't want to say it's not black and white, but it's not black and white.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're going to be like in the real world and represent a real world dialect or I mean there's cases where things that look like dialect aren't actually like also because like there are these conventional spellings that are used for African American English. There's also like people do write in Scots with Scots spellings and things like that. I think in those cases it's like consult with someone who actually speaks it.
Yes. Yes. If you do not yourself speak that language, please contact someone who does.
It might not be something to like grab for your fantasy culture, but
yeah, no.
Wrapping up here. So the Kickstarter is coming up. Everybody, August 15th, check that out. Get this book out because it will be useful to writers. It'll be useful to a lot of people. And I think that a lot of people listening may want to, you know, hear a perspective on, you know, how to incorporate some like sociolinguistics and world building of like the stuff around your language into things. So go check that out. And Connie, do you have any final thoughts, final advice before we tap out?
It's kind of in general or about the topic?
Well, I mean, yeah, just like any advice about linguistic world building that you would like people to stick with people here.
Oh, there was one. I did a little Q&A and there was one I thought of and I can't remember what it is right now. If you're coming up with names for a culture, you're coming up with for people, places, and things, and you're looking at the letters and it looks like a bad Scrabble hand, start over. But like kind of think about that sounds that make sense together, right? Not that make sense together, but like if you have like Ghirardelli, there's like a little bag of Ghirardelli chips right here, and like cherry, they probably don't come from the same language, right? They don't sound very similar to each other. But like, also, that's a really bad example because cherry comes from cerise, which is French, so it's more closely related to Italian than English. But it was just two things I had closest to hand. Or like bottle. bottle and Ghirardelli. Don't sound very
Yeah,
familiar.
yeah,
Or,
yeah.
or flask, for example. Come with better examples. I'm really bad at improvising. This is why I'm a writer, not an improvisational speaker.
Yeah.
But like, readers may or may not notice if you do that. But if a reader does notice that it's being consistent and the names sound like they could plausibly come from the same place, or like follow at least the same rules of phonetics, like same syllable structure, same allowable consonant clusters, if they're allowed at all that sort of thing. People might, if they don't notice, fine. If they do notice, they will love you for it, right? Be like, oh my gosh, they made the words that make sense. It sounds like it's from the same language. And like, if you borrow words, change them a little bit. So, like, we don't say tsunami in English, we say tsunami. We don't say angst, we say angst.
Right.
We don't say zeitgeist, we say zeitgeist. But everything matches the phonology and phonetics of the recipient language.
Well, that's useful advice, and you've said a lot of useful advice today, and
good.
I am excited for that book. I hope I can get a review copy.
Sure.
But well, let's everybody go. I will link to that in the show notes or the description on YouTube to the Kickstarter for when it goes live. And we're going to check out the column over on Tor as well. It's got a lot of useful information, reviews of books that people listening to this podcast or watching this podcast probably will be interested in. And you also have your YouTube channel, so
I do.
We can send people to that too. So thank you, Connie, for being on the show, and
thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank everyone else for listening or watching, and our patrons for funding this show. And I'm gonna say happy conlaying. Special thanks goes to our patrons, Mintaka, Connor Stewart Rowe, Kenan Kigunda, Viren Patrick, Graham Hill, Kay, Jesse, Sylvia Sotomayor, Jeremiah, Alexis Hugelman, Artifexian Soten, Nicholas Norblad, Eloivar Yana Mentoleum, Sigourney Hunter, Jack Keynes, Raka Grunk, Grammar. Conlangery's theme music is by Null Device. Conlangery is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license.